Welcome back to Cosmic Comics. In January of 1982, Marvel Comics published their first graphic novel, The Death of Captain Marvel. The book sold well, and I have often wondered if it was that or licensing issues which brought Marvel to introduce a new Captain Marvel by August of the same year. Her first appearance is in The Amazing Spider-Man, Volume 1, Annual Number 16, written by Roger Stern. And before I jump into the story, I want to call everybody's attention to the line work and coloring in this issue. John Romita Jr. and John Romita Sr. share an art credit on this issue. Throughout the annual, the characters constantly appear in motion, the backgrounds are filled with loads of small details, and the artwork regularly steps outside of the confines of its panel. And if that wasn't enough, Stan Goldberg's colors are over the top. It's not uncommon for backgrounds to have as many as 10 colors in this book. Monica Rambeau may not be the first person people think of when the words Captain Marvel are spoken, but she's probably the second or third. All stories begin somewhere, and after losing one Captain Marvel to cancer, the saga of another Captain Marvel begins here. Peter Parker is out and about when his spider sense begins to alert him that the woman he just passed is out of the ordinary. Peter might be getting a tingle from more than his spider sense as he's smitten by her good looks and doesn't believe she could be a danger. He would investigate further, but he's meeting his friends Liz and Harry Osborn, who are visiting him in the city. Spider-Man checks his watch and sees he's got some time to kill and decides to follow his spider sense and tail the attractive woman. Peter is aware that his behavior might seem off-putting and keeps his distance so he doesn't appear to be a pervert. A couple of things to note. 1. Peter's eyes are green. 2. The time looks to be about 10:35 a.m. And bear with me as I love to point out stuff like this. As the lady walks down the street, Peter assumes that she's an out-of-towner because native New Yorkers know better than to stroll through this neighborhood. While Peter is thinking this, the streets are full of people who I assume are mostly native New Yorkers. Peter is afraid she might get mugged and runs down an alley. He then leaps to the roof and changes into his Spider-Man costume. From a distance, the lady gets marked by two men. As she passes by, Mojo attempts to sweet-talk her while Scud grabs her purse. The straps break, and as Scud runs off, he tells her if she wants it back that she'll have to come and take it. The woman gives chase down an alley while Mojo comes up behind her. Mojo grabs the woman from behind and insinuates that they have plans to sexually assault her, but she surprises her attacker by flipping him over her head and into Scud, who was counting the money. As the two rise up from the ground, Mojo pulls out a large knife. Mojo attacks her, but she easily dodges the blow. Mojo wonders how she moves so fast. He doesn't have long to contemplate the question, as she quickly takes him down with a knee to the jaw and a punch to the back of the neck. Scud runs down the alley, fleeing from the woman who just flattened Mojo. Before Scud gets to the street, Spider-Man drops down and hits him in the jaw. Or as Spider-Man says, Scud ran into his fist. After the fight, Spider-Man is surprised to discover that his spider sense is buzzing more than ever. He saw the woman fight and knows she's a good fighter, but he still can't believe that she's a threat to him. He walks up behind her and starts to pay her a compliment, but maybe he shouldn't have snuck up on her first. She quickly turns in Spider-Man's direction, and before his feet can touch the ground, she reaches towards his chest and a burst of light sends Spider-Man flying into a pile of boxes. As he flies backwards, Spider-Man knows he's made a mistake. Spider-Man lands pretty hard, and for the first time we see the woman's perspective. She's concerned that she might have hurt Spider-Man. From what she's seen in the press, he's some kind of outlaw adventurer. She only blasted him because she was afraid he was another mugger. She thinks he looks okay and decides to leave. By showing she was worried about hurting him and ensuring he's okay, establishes that the woman isn't an enemy and sets up for the classic superhero trope of two heroes fighting because they don't have time to talk things out. The woman is worried about her power and what it might mean for the world if she can't control it. The suit is also ruined, so she shreds it. Literally. Scraps of fabric litter the ground around her afterwards, and we get our first glimpse at her costume. She refers to the costume as her working clothes, which means she's accepted her place as a costume superhero, but at the same time she admits that she's still new to all this. She still feels nervous about wearing the costume in public, and the third panel is kind of fun. It shows that her costume contains a pocket for her cash and keys. If anybody can think of other times she's shown using this pocket, please let me know in the comments below. As Spider-Man regains consciousness, the woman disappears in a bright flash of light and sound. Spider-Man swears he saw a lady turn into a bolt of lightning and disappear. As Spider-Man heads back to the rooftops, he notices that the Empire State Building is lit up brighter than anything else, but he's not certain that she would have had time to travel that far, that fast. Or if she did, perhaps he needs to reconsider what he's up against. Finally, we get a proper introduction. High above the noise and confusion of the city she stands, her form aglow with power beyond man's wildest dreams. Call her Captain Marvel. A gorgeous, full panel to introduce the new Captain Marvel. And a quick aside, if you're liking the content from this channel, please consider hitting that thumbs up button, and while you're down there, if you haven't already, subscribe to hear me talk more Cosmic Comics. From the rooftop, with Manhattan stretched out before her, the city looks larger than she ever imagined. She contrasts this with her hometown of New Orleans. She knows that most people only know one thing about New Orleans, Mardi Gras, but the city she knows is much more than Carnival. In New Orleans, the old and the new meet and mingle. There is both the charm of the French Quarter and the bright, flashy buildings of the New Orleans Harbor Patrol on the banks of the Mississippi. This is where Captain Marvel's origin story begins. Only weeks ago, she was a lieutenant for the Harbor Patrol and was in the office of her superior, the Harbor Master. She's here to discuss being passed over for promotion. We're given her last name, Rambeau. The Harbor Master attempts to blow her off by insisting that they only had 4 captain positions to fill this year, but Lieutenant Rambeau insisted that she was better qualified than the 4 men who were chosen. The Harbor Master leans back and tells her it's because her methods are too unorthodox. He needs people he knows are going to go by the book. Lieutenant Rambeau accuses him of passing her up on promotion because he doesn't want to see a woman in charge of a patrol boat. The Harbor Master gives her the stink eye and lets her know that he'll act like he didn't hear that before dismissing her. She leaves the office in a rush, while the Harbor Master warns her about going to the local media, implying that it's a tactic she's used in the past. Lieutenant Rambeau promises not to do anything that would make the patrol look bad on her way out. As she storms down the hall, we learn that her emotional outburst may be a regular occurrence, as one of the gentlemen whispers that Monica is on the warpath again. Rambeau hears this, but chooses to ignore it, but at least now we know her full name, Monica Rambeau. Once the lieutenant returns to her office, she's surprised to see an elderly man waiting on her. He introduces himself as Professor André Leclerc and claims to know her grandfather from the war. Monica recognizes his name and asks him what brings him by. Fear and guilt. Not a very good response. He wants to know if she is aware of his advanced work in physics, and of course she says no. He explains that he's a bit of a crackpot and that only one man ever listened to his theories. If you think it was going to be Monica's grandfather, you were wrong. Generalissimo Ernesto Ramirez, a South American dictator. Andre readily admits that it would have been nice to have a different employer, but this was the only guy willing to support his research. Andre devised a process to draw energy from other universes. Andre thought that he was about to make a major breakthrough when he found out that, surprise, the dictator wanted to use his research to make a weapon. After attempting to change the general's mind, Andre was forced to flee the country. After he left, Generalissimo hired Andre's assistant, Felipe Picaro, to continue the work from an old oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico. Andre has been attempting to get somebody to listen to him, but nobody in the government will take him seriously. Andre thinks that Felipe is making a bomb that would dwarf the size of current nuclear explosions. Rambeau is listening, but in her head she agrees that the entire idea sounds far-fetched. She wants to know what she's supposed to do about this. He's come here as a last-ditch effort to get somebody in the government to listen to him. Monica's reputation precedes her. He's hoping that if need be, she'll use less conventional methods to convince the authorities about the danger. He leans in hard on the friend of the family bit in his appeal for assistance. I love the look of this coffee mug. Monica has tomorrow off and agrees to help. The next morning, Monica borrows a friend's boat and takes it out near the oil rig. She's brought Professor Leclerc with her. The plan is for him to wait below deck while she goes on the oil rig. If anything goes wrong, they'll leave as fast as possible. As the professor goes below deck, he calls Monica his captain. The irony, of course, being that professionally, captain is the rank she keeps getting passed over for. The two are headed towards Roxxon Oil Tower number 25, which is currently being leased to Garina Petrochemicals Limited, which the professor believes to be a dummy corporation set up by Generalissimo. As she approaches the platform, Monica recognizes how crazy this idea is. She's worried because she has no authority to be here, but she's willing to humor the professor. As Monica approaches the platform, half a dozen guards arrive and tell her to turn back. She tries to convince the guards that she's been here before and that Roxxon usually let her use their helicopter pad for picnicking. She says this as she pulls off her robe to reveal a skimpy bathing suit underneath. The guards are considering making an exception for her when the professor's former understudy, Dr. Picaro, calls forth from an upper deck and asks them to bring her up, claiming he'll accept responsibility for her being here. Now that she's seen Dr. Picaro is here, Monica is starting to buy into the professor's story. Once she gets to the top of the stairs, Dr. Picaro introduces himself as Felipe and offers to join her on her picnic. Soon the two are enjoying a glass of wine on the helipad. As Dr. Picaro begins to talk about his alternative energy experiments, the lunch is interrupted by an intruder alarm. Monica knows that it can only be the professor. As Felipe runs off, Monica pretends to act scared and ask if they might be in danger. Felipe surprises her by grabbing her with both hands, shouting and pointing out that any danger could have been brought aboard by her and demands that she come with him. As soon as the two arrive where the professor has been captured, the professor immediately implicates Monica by shouting her name. Come on, dude. He sneaked on board hoping to render the experimental research device inactive. He then attempts to convince Felipe that due to the forces involved not to use the device. Felipe grabs the professor by the jacket and insists that he understands that his energy disruptor can completely destroy any city within 2,000 miles. The professor insists the power is too unstable to control. Felipe claims that his machine is stable and will change the balance of world power. He drags Monica behind him as he prepares the machine's first test. For this test, he is planning on wiping Fort Benning, Georgia off the map. Monica stares, bewildered, shocked that he's actually going to do this. She knows that she has to act, so she elbows Felipe in the gut and then takes both hands and strikes the machine as hard as she can. The silicon grids covering its surface splinter under her blow, circuits melt, and before the guards can react, there is a massive explosion which tosses men through the air. An instant later on the New Orleans waterfront, a streak of energy comes from the sky, touches down on the dock and forms into Monica Rambeau. She's disoriented at first and doesn't appear to know where she is. Immediately, she starts looking for help and starts knocking on the first door she finds, all the while feeling faint. She desires to be inside, and following a brief, shimmering sensation, she finds herself standing in the middle of the room. She's shocked by the sudden change in location, but decides warning somebody about the planned attack on Fort Benning is far more important than worrying about how she got here. She grabs a radio and calls in the emergency. Only one problem. The call should never go out because the machine is unplugged and disconnected. But still, a burst of energy travels into the mic and allows for transmission. When her words are picked up in the Gulf of Mexico, the incoming message hurts the ears of the guy manning the radio. Monica still seems relatively out of it. As she lifts her head, she complains about the cold and goes in search of something warmer to wear than a bikini and robe. Fortunately, the building she's entered is a storage facility for Mardi Gras outfits. As she looks through the available clothing, she mentions the fact that most of the clothing here has less fabric than she's already wearing. In order to cover herself, Monica combines parts of several different outfits in an attempt to stay both warm and modest. As for the mask, she sees it as a bonus that will save her from personal embarrassment. Once dressed, she takes a look at herself in the mirror before heading out. As she leaves, she hopes that the Navy is capable of arriving in time to save the professor. The next moment, the sky lights up from an arc of energy rising forth over the horizon. Monica surmises that the bolt came from the same direction as the oil rig is located. Monica desires to be at the old man's side and in the next instant is gone. Almost at the same instant, Monica arrives back on the oil rig. The oil rig itself is slowly being shaken apart by the energy arcing off it. Monica is surprised to find herself here once again. The number of unconscious men laying on the ground around her is kind of disturbing. She goes looking for the professor, hoping he can explain what is going on. Monica hears Felipe yelling at the professor and runs below deck. As she arrives, Felipe shoots the professor while accusing him of sabotaging the disruptor panel. I'm not sure why he's blaming the professor when it was Monica who destroyed everything and she did it right in front of him. Monica disarms Felipe with a kick to the stomach and then rushes to the professor's side. She wants to take him to safety, but he warns her that there is no such thing as a safe place anymore. The hole that Felipe opened between worlds is going to keep getting bigger. Within one day it will be planet-sized and two universes will smash together. Monica takes a moment to reflect that perhaps this was caused by her destroying the control panel, but decides that it doesn't matter how it got started, because she needs to focus on closing the hole up. She wonders how she can plug a hole in the air, but doesn't get to think on it long as she's sucked into the portal. Once she's sucked in, she begins to feel the hole closing around her, and the experience is extremely painful. Felipe is watching, and his thoughts tell us that Monica is absorbing the excess energy and in the process shrinking the hole. Most alarmingly, her body will be crushed when the hole slams shut. The professor is lying on the ground, calling out for his captain. Felipe hears the professor's cries and takes a second shot at the old man with his gun. As he fires, Monica calls for the professor to look out. Monica transforms herself once again. In the process, she slams shut the dimensional hole. Additionally, she's capable of reaching out and atomizing the bullets in midair. I reckon that makes her faster than a speeding bullet? She then turns and strikes at Felipe for the third time this issue, this time shocking him senseless. One of the guards is regaining consciousness as Monica moves to check on the professor. As she comes to his aid, he calls her his captain once more. Monica wants to get the professor out of there before the Navy arrives, and she has to start answering questions. Hold on, so she's purposely going to remove witnesses from a crime scene to absolve herself and the professor of any involvement? Let's step back. Let's play devil's advocate for a moment and give a hot take. From what we've seen so far, Monica Rambeau is an unorthodox, dirty cop performing an undercover operation outside of her jurisdiction, and when it all goes south, she fails to take personal responsibility for her actions and flees the scene of a crime with a witness as part of a conspiracy to avoid culpability. This might be excusable except for Monica's training as a Port Authority officer and the fact that Monica already considered that she could be the catalyst for all of the destruction we've seen today. Additionally, there are hurt people all over the place, and instead of providing assistance, she's fleeing the scene. She's more concerned about herself and the professor than she is for others. Granted, if she had left things alone, we might have lost Fort Benning, but she never should have been there in the first place. As Monica and the professor head up the stairs, the guard that had regained consciousness watches them walk away. He witnessed her saving all of them. He had heard the professor call her his captain. As she walks away, he says she is wonderful. Capitanas de Maravilla. 2 days later, Monica is back in her office at Harbor Patrol headquarters when Professor LeClaire walks in. She's jumpy and may be experiencing a little PTSD. Monica has hardly slept for the past 2 nights and wants to know what the professor has found out about her condition. Monica's body was transubstantiated by the dimensional interface, which means she can now transform her body into any form of electromagnetic energy. Monica can become a sentient packet of radio waves, light, or electricity. She can move through solid objects as X-rays and travel at the speed of light. On the offensive end, she can release small amounts of energy as a force blast without losing any appreciable body mass. He then hands her a package. Inside is a new suit modeled after the one she wore the night of the accident. This one has been fabricated from unstable molecules that are more durable than the original. Sure, but does it have a pocket to keep your keys in? Monica appreciates the thought, but isn't so sure that she needs to have a costume. She's not even certain she wants to use the powers again. He tells her, "We all have a destiny, mon capitaine." I don't know how that's really said in French. Sorry. Monica has had enough and requests that he stop calling her that. As he knows her rank is only lieutenant, he then pulls forth a newspaper from inside his jacket. The headline reads, "Who is Captain Marvel?" One of the oil rig workers kept saying, "The captain is a marvel." Professor Leclerc points out that with her new abilities, Monica can do things nobody has even dreamed of doing. She told him she took her current job to serve and protect, and he suggests that she could do a lot of good with her new abilities. Soon afterwards, Monica stops by the harbor master's office, where she turns in her badge and gun, telling her boss that she doesn't need his little ranks or his little mind anymore. She then declares herself a captain before walking out and closing the door behind her. The professor seems uncertain that quitting her job was the right move, but Monica appears convinced. She tells him that she's been wanting to do that for the last 2 years. Now that she is out from under the thumb of the tyrannical harbor master, she feels there is no limit to what she can accomplish. The two of them decide to go out for a drink to celebrate. Okay, that was just the origin story. Now we return to the story at hand. For a Spider-Man annual, one thing we haven't seen very much of so far is Spider-Man. We pick back up on top of the Empire State Building a few weeks later. Monica is beginning to fear that her power might be as great of a threat as Dr. Picaro's machine. As she transports herself down to the observation deck, we discover that she's having to actively hold back a rising tide of energy within her. If she doesn't work at suppressing it, the energy will overcome her. She decides that she needs help, and the professor has given her all the assistance he can. She needs to find somebody with real scientific chops. While pondering her problem, she uses some viewing binoculars to scan the city skyline. This implies she's still got a pocket, as she's feeding the meter at the top of the binoculars. While she's looking over the city, Spider-Man climbs the building, wondering how she got here so fast. Once he reaches the top of the building, his spider sense is buzzing. He's going to web her up, but reconsiders. What if she's a good guy? He decides that if she's a good guy, then she'll understand why he couldn't take any chances. Ah, yes. The old guilty until proven innocent routine. Monica easily avoids his webbing and disappears in a flash of light. Spider-Man decides that he needs to take her by surprise next time. This bothers me because Spider-Man had the drop on her that time. That's why he debated on whether or not he should sucker punch her with his webbing instead of trying to talk things out. Anyway, before Spider-Man can super sneak attack her, he needs to find her. He's standing there thinking of what to do next when he decides he should take a look at what she was viewing through the binoculars. As he goes to take a look, they cut off. And what do you know? He's not holding any quarters. No pockets. A kid walks up from behind and wants to know who the guy in the costume is. Spider-Man tells the kid there is no need to panic before telling him, "I'm Spider-Man." Got to love the kid's response. His dad told him that there's no such thing as Spider-Man. He's just a hoax the media barons cooked up to sell papers. Spider-Man tries to convince the kid that he really is Spider-Man and that he needs a quarter, but the kid is having none of it. If he wants that quarter, he's going to have to prove that he's Spider-Man. Spider-Man isn't too happy about this, but obliges all the same, in his head thinking that the kid is a little pain. After a couple of poses on the side of the building and explaining that the kid shouldn't try these stunts himself, Spider-Man asks for his quarter. The kid obliges and runs off to tell his parents what he's seen. Unfortunately, by the time he convinces his parents to look outside, Spider-Man has already left. The building Monica was looking at is the Baxter Building, home of the Fantastic Four. Monica is shocked to find the Fantastic Four headquarters is in a state of disarray, but notes that the repairs have already begun, indicating that the good guys won. She pushes ahead, looking for Reed Richards. The Thing arrives and asks if he can help her with something. He also wants to know who she is. She informs him that she is Captain Marvel. He replies, "Not unless you came back from the dead. Mob died months ago. Besides, he was a blonde." She seems surprised that there was another Captain Marvel and pleads ignorance. The Thing brushes it off, noting the original Captain Marvel probably wouldn't mind, and there is most likely more than one Thing out there. Over the next few minutes, Captain Marvel explains why she is there. She needs help releasing the energy she's absorbed. She's afraid she might explode. The Thing becomes alarmed when he hears that the blast could contain enough force to level the city. Captain Marvel knows the dangers she is putting everybody in by coming here, but insists that coming here was the only way she could contact Reed Richards. The Thing lets her know that Reed and Sue are on vacation at Martha's Vineyard, and he's afraid that by the time they can reach Reed, it might be too late. He suggests they try contacting the Avengers. I'll point out that again, Monica is putting her needs above the safety of others. She knows she is putting millions of lives at risk, but doesn't care. Perhaps if she had stayed at the oil rig and worked with the Navy once they arrived, somebody might have been capable of putting her in contact with something like Project Pegasus, which specializes in energy research and could potentially find a way to alleviate her current problem. The Thing goes to dial up the Avengers, and Captain Marvel asks if he's calling their direct line. Once the Thing says that he is, she jumps into the computer and uses it to transport herself to the other end of the connection. Right on her heels, Spider-Man arrives, asking if the Thing has seen a woman matching Monica's description, and the Thing explains that she changed into radio waves and left for Avengers Mansion. He also tells Spider-Man she might explode. Before the Thing can explain that she's not a menace, Spider-Man has already left, heading towards Avengers Mansion to offer assistance. At Avengers Mansion, Iron Man is manning the computer when a priority signal radio call comes through from the Baxter Building. As Iron Man reaches towards the panel, he's hit with a burst of energy coming forth from the console. The sudden discharge of Captain Marvel's body arriving is too much for Iron Man's suit, causing his armor to overload. The damage goes far deeper than that. The computer she arrived here through, its power systems were also overloaded, the result of which is the mansion's defense systems have stopped working or are malfunctioning. Jarvis is bringing a few things for a meeting when a stunnilator lands a shot only a few feet away from him. Knowing that something must be wrong, he immediately flees in an attempt to find Iron Man. Monica is afraid that she knocked Iron Man out, and he lets her know that he may be down, but he's not out. He needs her to help him by sending a small spark across his chest plate's induction nodules in order to reset his circuit breakers. Captain Marvel wants to help, but doesn't have that kind of control over her power. Iron Man lets her know they'll have to wait for help. Jarvis walks in complaining about the loss of power throughout the mansion. Monica tells Jarvis that she shut down Iron Man's power armor. Jarvis takes this as a threat and runs to get the other Avengers. Before he disappears, Jarvis manages to call Captain Marvel a shameless trollop. It's cute considering that she'll lead the Avengers one day. Monica attempts to explain, but at the same time she begins to glow from her increasing power levels. When Spider-Man arrives, there is a small crowd gathered outside of Avengers Mansion. Once he approaches, he notices that some of the mansion's defenses appear to be on the fritz. As he enters the front doors, Jarvis comes running down the hallway, asking for help. He doesn't like having to trust Spider-Man for help, but under the circumstances, he's left with no choice. Captain Marvel has left Iron Man. Before leaving, he instructed her to go to the mansion's lab and lock herself inside their adamantium containment chamber. Spider-Man finally gets the jump on Captain Marvel and covers her in webs from head to toe. With a definitive whoomph, Captain Marvel stretches out all of Spider-Man's webbing, a feat that leaves him shocked. Captain Marvel apologizes for blasting Spider-Man earlier in the day and offers to settle up later, but right now she needs to go. She then attempts to blind Spider-Man with a flash of bright light, but thanks to his spider senses, Spider-Man closes his eyes in time. With his eyes still closed, he reaches out and grabs Captain Marvel, who screams for Spider-Man to get his hands off her. No means no, and Spider-Man has no right to be assaulting her. In an effort to defend herself, Captain Marvel tries to electrify Spider-Man, but again his spider senses gives him the foresight to let go of her. Spider-Man then grabs Captain Marvel's hand and backhands her across the face, while Wasp shouts no, and Iron Man races around the corner calling him a fool. Yeah, that just happened. Spider-Man hit Captain Marvel hard enough to knock her out. Spider-Man attempts to explain, but Iron Man cuts him off. With Captain Marvel KO'd, the situation is more dangerous than ever. Since she's unconscious, she's no longer in control of her power. She could explode any second unless they find a way to leech off her excess power. Iron Man instructs Spider-Man to retrieve 12 feet of high-induction flex cable from the ceiling panel and then coil it around her. Iron Man pops open his wrist guards, and Wasp wants to know what he's doing. He's overriding his armor's micro-circuit breakers to allow his suit to handle more power. He checks with Spider-Man to ensure that his webbing is non-conductive before asking him to cover all of him, except for his wrist, in webs. What's going on here is as Captain Marvel expends her energy, Spider-Man's webbing will stop her energy from expanding beyond the webbing. But we know that she can release enough energy to blow out his webbing, so Iron Man is going to absorb her energy and push it away from all of them using his wrist. They kind of forgot about the underside, but whatever. The Wasp isn't certain Iron Man should be doing this, and he lets her know he's not certain if his suit can take this much power. Spider-Man hears it in Iron Man's voice. It's as if he only half expects to survive, but this is the only option one of them can think of in this moment. Seeing this kind of heroism and knowing that Iron Man might not have to put his life on the line if Spider-Man hadn't knocked out Captain Marvel. Wasp begins pulling Spider-Man from the room, explaining that they should leave in case Iron Man can't contain Captain Marvel's power. As Spider-Man turns to leave, he's caught off guard by the name Captain Marvel, and Wasp lets him know that it's a new one, not the one who died. Spider-Man now feels even worse, knowing that he might have killed the new Captain Marvel. A brief aside, Spider-Man was really torn up by the death of Captain Marvel as seen in Marvel graphic novel number 1, The Death of Captain Marvel. Before the two can leave the room, things get dangerous, and thanks to his spider sense, Spider-Man is capable of putting up a shield of protective webbing between himself and Iron Man. He instructs the Wasp to crouch behind the barrier with him. Iron Man is inside of the webbing. His gauntlets surge with energy, passing everything through twin repulsor ray generators and releasing his energy as two beams of devastating force. Over time, the power levels keep building and building until there is a bright flash of light, and afterwards, it appears to be over. About the time things are wrapping up inside the mansion, the Thing arrives via cab. Police have set up a police line in front of the gates to Avengers Mansion, which are currently holding back a gathering crowd. The Thing is allowed entry past the crowd, and at first it appears to him as though the place is empty. But then he finds everybody all at once. Jarvis appears to have been preparing for a meeting of the Avengers. Present are Captain America, Iron Man, Hawkeye, Thor, She-Hulk, and the Wasp, and the non-Avengers, Captain Marvel, Spider-Man, and now the Thing. Here we see Captain Marvel and Captain America meeting for the first time. Everybody is happy to see the Thing. He wants to know if the Avengers were capable of solving your problem, and Captain Marvel claims to be good as new. Spider-Man takes a look at the clock, remembers that he only had 15 minutes before he was supposed to meet his visiting friends, and leaves the party from a second-story window. The time on the clock appears to be 11:44. Based on the clocks, an hour and 10 minutes have passed since the start of the story. Once Peter returns to the bus station, we discover that he's arrived 30 minutes past Liz and Harry's expected arrival time, which means the entire story lasted only about 45 minutes, and Captain Marvel's short-circuiting of the mansion must have also messed up their clocks. Despite being late, things work out for Peter Parker. Harry and Liz were delayed and had to take a second bus, so they arrived just after Peter. One thing to note on this last page is Peter Parker suddenly has brown eyes. And that wraps up our look at the first appearance and origin story of the second Captain Marvel. She definitely steals the show for this annual, as Spider-Man takes a back seat to introducing a new character who carries with her the name of the brand itself. I'll continue to follow her adventures with the Avengers in a future episode of Cosmic Comics. Thanks for watching. Feel free to hit any of the buttons below. I'm out.